Okay, so today we're going to take a look at creating some line art using Adobe Illustrator. So we're just going to start off by opening Adobe Illustrator. I'm using the previous version, CS5. CS5.5 is the current version with CS6 coming out soon. Now we're just going to create a new file. So File and New. We're just going to create a basic A4 page. We'll leave it in landscape position, that's fine. Landscape or portrait doesn't particularly matter, but we'll just leave it in landscape. So we just have A4 size, we'll leave it at the color mode RGB, as we'll mostly be seeing it on screen. We won't particularly print out this document, so we'll OK that. So here's our new document created. So now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a basic image in the background that we're going to trace over and create our line art with. Now to put an image into the background of an Adobe Illustrator file, you use the File and Place option. So we go to File and Place. Now I'm just going to find my image. It's image 16. It's a page of a comic. So we're just going to double click on that to place it onto our stage. Now this is a page from a comic known as One Piece. It's slightly larger than our A4 page, so we're going to shrink it down using the free transform tool here. So we're just going to select the free transform tool. I'm going to go up to the corner here of our image. Now we're going to hold the shift key and hold the left mouse button, and now we're just going to move our image down in size. Now holding the shift key, it means that the image will always stay in proper scale, so it won't stretch left or right or up or down. So it's still going past it here at the corner, so once again we're going to hold the shift key and we're just going to stretch it down. So that isn't too bad now. Just move it up a bit, yeah. That's about right now, it's fitting in. So there's our background image now. So we don't want to edit this image at all. We want to leave this in the background untouched. So we're going to create a new layer. We're just going to click the new layer button here. So create new layer. So layer 2 is where we're going to be creating all the line art. Layer 1 is our background template, and we're just going to simply lock that by pressing the lock square here. So we toggle this by clicking it. A padlock appears and this image is no longer editable. So layer 1 is locked. We can't touch or edit anything in layer 1. So now the main tool we're going to be using today is the pen tool, just to create some simple line art. So now I'll just make the background image invisible for a second while I just give you a quick glance over the pen tool. So I'll just toggle that off, invisibility. So now we're going to be using the pen tool. Now we'll be using the pen tool without any fill. So to get rid of this fill color, we'll simply click the None option here. This means there'll be no fill. All we'll be creating is black lines. So now when you're using the pen tool, you simply click. So I'm just going to click the left mouse button, and that just creates an anchor point. If I move to another location and just click again, creates another anchor point. So that's a straight line joining those 2 points. Now you can do that numerous times just to create whatever straight edge shape you want. And once you go back to the first one, the first anchor point, you'll notice the little circle appearing beside the pen. Once I click on that, it makes it a complete shape. So that's now a complete shape. It's a complete straight edge shape. Now we don't particularly need that, so we're just going to click the delete tool, or the delete key, sorry. So you just click in place whenever you want a straight line. Click at the point where you want the corner to be. Now once you get back to the first anchor point, the little circle will appear beside the pen. You click on that and you have a simple straight edge shape. So now if you want to make curved lines, we will click first with an anchor point. Now we're going to hold down our click with the second anchor point, so we're going to click and hold down. And now if I move my mouse, I can create a simple curve. Now you'll see the further I go away from the anchor point, the more delicately the curve can be moved. If I go in right close to the anchor point, the curve can be very kind of sharp, can be very kind of quickly changed. So if you want a very delicate curve, you should move a nice bit away from the anchor point, and you can move your curve however you want then. So now I'll just let go of my mouse, and there's that curve created. So now you'll see these two pivot points are after appearing as well. Now this pivot point here, it relates to the curve before that anchor point. So this pivot point here controls this curve, and this pivot point here controls the line that will appear after this anchor point. So what I mean by that is I'm just going to click, let's say we want another point here. I'll just click and I'll hold my mouse. You'll see now, I'll just release the mouse just to give you a glance at this now. This anchor point here, it's trying to create a curve starting off in that direction and then turning towards our anchor point. So now if you ever want to change any of these pivot points, you just select the black arrow, the selection tool. You hover over it. You'll see that the little black square is appearing beside the selection arrow. So now if I click on this, I can actually control the curve. Now you'll see I'm actually controlling both anchor points. So I'm pivoting them round so I can change the curve as I want. So that's how you control them. So you can change your curves around as you want. Now we don't need that line, so we'll just select that and delete it. And now just a little more about the pen tool again. So if I start off with a line here, a point here, point here, I add a curve. If I want to finish the line at that, I simply press the Enter key, press Enter, and that means I can create another anchor point wherever I want again. Now if you forget to press Enter, so let's say I click a point here, I create another curve here. If I forget to press Enter, the next place I point my pen, I click my pen, so let's say I click it up here, it'll automatically join those two lines. So anytime you're finished drawing a line, just remember to click Enter, so I'll click Enter again, and now I can draw my new line. As well as that, if you don't want a new curve, so what I mean by that is, so I create a curve here, and now I don't want this straight line to affect my new curve. I don't want this pivot point to affect the new curve that I'm adding. So what I'll do is I'll click again on the same point. You'll see the little kind of upside down V shape is appearing beside the pen. If I click on that, it deletes the second pivot point. That means now if I click up here, it'll just create a straight line and I create a new curve as I want. So you're not restricted in access by this, in control of the curve by the second pivot point. You can create a new curve as you want. Now that's just kind of the basics of the pen. Now it takes practice more than anything just to get used to it. You'll kind of use each of those techniques as you're kind of over time with it. So now we'll just start off. So here's the image we want to trace. So what we'll do now is we'll start with, let's say, this character here. This character is known as Tony Chopper. Now you'll see it's all kind of curves really. There's very few straight lines with this character. So we'll be selecting our pen tool. And let's say we'll start here with just the arch of his back. So we'll click here at the start of the line. We'll click up here where it only curves a little. And we'll just move away just to make our curve. Now since there'll be a lot of curves on this, we'll get rid of our second pivot point. So we'll click on that point again to remove the second pivot point. And let's say here then, this will be the end of the next curve. So we draw around and we just try and get it as close as we can. And that's about right now. So there's the end of one line. So we'll press the Enter key. And that finishes the first line. So next, let's say we want to do his nose here. We'll click here at the start of the line. We'll click here where it's relatively straight, maybe a small bit of a curve. Now we don't want the second pivot point here either because we'll be going in a different direction. So once again we'll click again on the point. And then we'll go to, let's say, just underneath his nose here. And we'll curve our new line. Once again, we'll delete the second pivot point. And once again, we'll delete it. And there, now we'll click enter to finish that line. So now just to get a quick glance at how much we've done, we've just created the arch of his back and just a portion of his nose there. So now I'll do, let's say, his legs here, and then we'll kind of speed it up a bit. So we'll start here at the bottom of his leg, just out here, creating kind of a corner. Now we want a corner on this, so we'll definitely have to delete the second pivot point. So we'll click on the point again, and this is almost a straight line, maybe a small bit of curve, and that finishes that line. The next one then is going from here, straight line, and almost a straight line again. And click enter. And now his leg here. We'll get rid of the second pivot point. Click it around there. Around here. Now try to make your curves, try not to put an anchor point in the middle of a curve. Try to only make anchor points where the line kind of straightens out. It's a lot easier rather than having numerous anchor points on a curve. It makes things very hard to control. So we'll just start here again. So here's where the line roughly straightens out. So we can have a little curve there. Get rid of the second pivot point, and this is almost straight line, and a straight line once again. So we'll press enter. So we'll just give a quick look at that. So we just need the inside of his leg here. So running from his nose to about here is a fairly straight line. We'll get rid of the second pivot point. Down a bit more on the straight line. And just about here then it'll be a curve on its own. So I'll press enter. So that now is his two front legs, his nose, and just the arch of his back. Now if you ever want to change any anchor points at any time, use the direct selection tool. So let's say the end of this line here, we can just click on that and hold down, and we can actually move this anchor point to wherever we want it to be. So we'll move it in, let's just say a little closer there, so the lines double over one another rather than having that little space in between them. So there, now the lines just kind of join up. Now you'll see anytime I hover over an anchor point, the anchor point kind of presents itself. Now that's very necessary, because you have to click directly over an anchor point in order to move it. So just be very careful of that. So we'll just move this, let's say, down a little more. So that doesn't look too bad now. So now we have his two legs, we have his nose. We can draw his hat next. Now one last thing, the last thing you'll really need to know about the pen tool is the joining of lines. So let's say now we start off with, let's say, this antler here. So we'll have, let's say, that. Get rid of the anchor point. Let's say we'll have it to about here then. So there's one anchor and antler roughly done. So now we'll have, let's say, this one here. So now you'll see once I get down to about here, the small little square appears beside the pen tool. That means if I click here, I'm about to join the two lines. So this previous antler line here, just at the end of it, this means we'll join the two lines. Now it's up to yourself whether or not if you want to join them. It's just if you join them, it can become quite hard to control them. What I mean by that is if you join the two lines together, all of a sudden the pivot points become dependent on one another, and it becomes very hard to control the curve of one half of the line without controlling the other half. So what you're better off doing is just, let's say, coming relatively close to it. Let's say about there. That's roughly our antler done. So we'll press enter. Now what you're best to do in those situations is just to move the anchor point in that a little bit more, and maybe change the curve a little bit. So that now means the lines are pretty much crossing over one another, but you can still control each line individually. So it just makes things a lot easier to control. So now I think I'll just speed you through the rest. There's no need, you have all the basic tips there. So I'll just speed you through the rest of this saw. So that now is a simple put together of it. Let's just turn off the visibility now. That's a quick glance at it. Now we can simply join, let's say, this line here together with this line here. We should get, yeah, the little square icon. So we put that there, and that joins them up relatively nicely. We can see here now that we can just move this, let's say, up a little bit to where it hits the antler, and this just up a little bit at the same spot. We can do the same with just one or two slight little things there as well. Just move this, let's say, down a bit to the antler, and just do over to it a bit as well. Now that's just a very rough kind of line out of it just for the moment. So just open up, let's say, one I've done earlier now. So here's one that I put together. Now you're talking maybe about 10 hours worth of work in an image like that now, just to put it all together and just to go through each individual line. Now what I did for this particular one was I took each individual character. So Luffy out here in the front, he was an individual layer in my image. The same with Zoro and with Robin and with Frankie and all of them. Each individual character was an individual layer on my Adobe Illustrator project. It just made things a lot easier to organize, especially for things like the background. I'd have them as the lowest layer. Then as the characters kind of came forward, so the Shibukai member here, he was kind of in the background. Frankie was at the very back altogether along with the Sunny, the ship. And people like Brooke, he was very much in the background. Luffy was obviously the very topmost layer because you can see relatively everything of him. The same with Zoro. With Sanji, he was just behind Luffy. That was the only character he really needed to be behind. So that now is just a quick demonstration of that. So that's just a simple way just to kind of create basic line art. Now it kind of depends as well the amount of time you put into it. So, but if you ever do, let's say, want to change around some simple things as well with your line, you can always just select the line And there's just the basic line options up here as well if you ever want to change anything in particular, the width of the stroke or the color, the uniformity of the stroke, just some basic options there as well then. So that's pretty much it. That's just a basic tutorial, just kind of to get you to grips really with the pen tool, and just some simple applications that can be used with it. It's just to get you kind of thinking towards what you can do with Illustrator.